Right now, the Persian Gulf is experiencing a severe maritime bottleneck driven by asymmetric warfare. Physical transit for this critical commodity has effectively stalled. This map displays the Strait of Hormuz, the geographical choke point through which these vessels must pass. The disruption here has triggered an immediate market shock, with Brent crude breaching $100 per barrel. While high oil prices typically benefit exporters, this physical blockade is causing acute financial strain in the United Arab Emirates. To understand why, we have to look at their currency, the dirham, which is strictly pegged to the US dollar. The UAE exports physical oil for a continuous, massive influx of US dollars. The central bank uses these to build foreign exchange reserves and defend the dirham's peg. But when military blockades halt the tankers, this loop fails. The US dollar influx instantly dries up. The market reaction to this severed loop is immediate. The UAE must burn through its existing foreign exchange reserves to defend its currency, triggering regional capital flight and intense downward pressure on domestic equities. This creates a strict mathematical tension for the UAE. If the blockade persists, the central bank faces a choice: completely drain its sovereign reserves to maintain the peg, or abandon the peg and suffer a localized financial crisis. The crisis exposes a profound vulnerability for the region. Immense subterranean wealth offers zero protection if geography prevents its conversion into sovereign liquidity. To bridge this liquidity gap, the UAE has quietly initiated negotiations with the US Treasury and the Federal Reserve for a highly unusual financial lifeline. They are requesting a currency swap line, a liquidity backstop to prevent asset fire sales. The Fed lends US dollars to the UAE, taking dirham as temporary collateral. The UAE central bank then injects these dollars into domestic commercial banks to stave off market panic. This ad hoc request sits outside standard policy. The Fed maintains permanent standing swap lines with close institutional allies like the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, and the Bank of Japan, but extending one to the UAE requires special approval. The Federal Reserve is traditionally reluctant to grant these requests. They are typically reserved only for severe funding pressures that threaten to spill over and infect the U.S. domestic economy. However, UAE officials are applying geopolitical friction. They argue their economy is currently entangled in a destructive proxy war spearheaded by U.S. foreign policy, and they view this financial backstop as strictly necessary compensation for the damage. It is a clear demonstration that a fiat currency peg tied to a physical export inherently transfers physical logistical risks directly onto the central bank's balance sheet. To force Washington's hand, the UAE is utilizing immense leverage. They are implicitly threatening to abandon the dollar entirely and settle future oil trades in alternative currencies if the swap line is denied. The primary alternative currency they are leveraging is the Chinese yuan. This is a highly credible structural threat. In 2023, the UAE and the People's Bank of China renewed a bilateral currency swap agreement, establishing the architecture to bypass the dollar. This builds on China's deep pre-existing financial penetration in the Gulf, specifically through the Cross-Border Interbank Payment System, or CIPS. CIPS already has over 1,300 participants across 109 countries. It provides a stable, turnkey platform for yuan settlements that entirely bypass Western financial rails. Adding intense pressure to this dynamic is a radical new proposition from Iran regarding the physical choke point at Hormuz. Iran has proposed allowing safe tanker passage through the strait, exclusively for oil transactions denominated in Chinese yuan. This aligns perfectly with Beijing's broader economic strategy. By creating alternative financial channels with Arab nations, China directly mitigates the impact and jurisdictional reach of U.S. sanctions. We are observing a shift in priorities across the Middle East and North Africa. Nations are increasingly willing to prioritize Chinese economic and infrastructure partnerships over traditional U.S. security alliances.
U.S. dollar hegemony in the Gulf is no longer defended solely by interest rates. It is actively contested by operational, turnkey liquidity alternatives from Beijing. While the financial ledgers and oil barrels dominate the headlines, focusing solely on them misses the true vulnerability. The Gulf is home to massive, overlooked industrial output. Beyond crude oil, Qatar and Iran export enormous volumes of highly specific critical inputs: natural gas, methanol, and urea. To measure the actual impact of losing these materials, economists use the Kiel Institute's KITE model. This is an extension of standard trade models, explicitly designed to calculate bottleneck dynamics in global supply chains. Standard market models treat the Hormuz closure as an easily substitutable energy shock. They assume that if Gulf oil disappears, buyers will smoothly adjust and source energy elsewhere. The KITE model corrects this error by mapping what happens during an asymmetric input bottleneck. When a foundational raw material is lost, the costs cascade exponentially because industrial alternatives simply do not exist. Here is the first critical step in that pipeline. Gulf natural gas dictates the global Haber-Bosch process, which synthesizes methane into ammonia. Step 2. That ammonia is converted into granular urea fertilizer. This chemical compound is the absolute backbone of global agriculture. Step 3. That fertilizer supply transmits directly into global crop yields, dictating the harvest output for wheat, cereals, and oilseeds. When the KITE model cuts off the Gulf gas supply, the data shows exactly how costs propagate. They are amplified twice, first causing massive price spikes in chemical production, and again at food production. This introduces a highly dangerous geopolitical timing variable. The disruption in the Gulf perfectly aligns with the Northern Hemisphere's spring planting season. Agricultural procurement is rigid. Missing a fertilizer application window in April guarantees a locked-in, mathematically certain crop failure for the entire year. You cannot apply the inputs 3 months late. Standard analyses misprice Hormuz because they view it as a temporary energy glitch. In reality, it is the trigger for an irreversible energy-to-fertilizer-to-food cascade. This map models the macroeconomic fallout using KITE data. Notice the stark insulation of the United States. Thanks to domestic energy independence, the U.S. registers a negligible welfare loss of negative 0.07%. Contrast that with the violently asymmetric damage across sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. The divergence is extreme. Developing nations face economic and welfare losses 10 to 20 times larger than advanced Western economies. The nations highlighted in deep red share a specific structural profile. They entirely lack domestic energy production, and they lack domestic chemical manufacturing. Consequently, they suffer a compounding double shock. They must pay premium, spiked prices for imported energy, while simultaneously paying massively inflated prices for imported urea. This dynamic instantly strips away thin sovereign fiscal buffers, and those costs transmit directly into hyperinflated household food prices. The cascading damage of this choke point closure doesn't impact the global economy evenly. It falls exactingly along the fault lines of global economic inequality. Furthermore, there is a logistical hangover. Even if a diplomatic breakthrough ended hostilities today, the physical market does not instantly reset. Maritime logistics operate on rigid lead times. It takes months to schedule, reposition, and return scattered tanker fleets back to the Gulf terminals. Industrial buyers locked into annual procurement cycles for liquid natural gas and precursor chemicals have no immediate mechanisms to rewrite their sourcing contracts quickly. And the agricultural calendar is absolute. A delayed shipment of fertilizer arriving in May cannot save a crop that required planting in March. Financial engineering, like a Federal Reserve swap line, can repair a petrostate's balance sheet, but a central bank cannot print physical urea. This current conflict proves that the extreme concentration of critical inputs leaves the global food network structurally defenseless.